record and then hit the go live on LinkedIn Live. Okay. It says it takes a few seconds to. All right, we're good to go. Hey everyone, excited. We have a very special guest today, Venus O'Hara, that we met before. For people that watched the previous episode, I wanted to get you back because I was fascinated, and I think a lot of people, especially on LinkedIn, because we are more corporate-y, um, and you were speaking about how to reframe having negative comments and being able to put yourself out there a lot more. And I noticed like a lot of your posts have been very vulnerable, especially on LinkedIn. But so just wanted to have you back here. And you're an inspiration for all of us because of the vulnerability, the authenticity, just the relatability you have. So I'm excited to share your story with the world today.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's a real pleasure to share the wisdom and strength about embracing negative comments. Definitely.
Oh, and let me just go into a bit more about your background so people have a little bit of context.
Mhm.
So, you're a sex positive activist, model, writer. I know you're a big blogger, and you have a podcast called the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast, and it seems like that's going. So you do a lot of holistic self-love and a lot of self-development content, and you also have a meditation as well, which I'm sure you'll share a little bit more about that during this LinkedIn Live today.
Yeah, because I started my content creation journey 15 years ago. So I've had a lot of time to get used to negative comments. And
Yeah.
also, subject matter of what I do, I had to kind of let go of those about worrying about what other people are going to think of me because I went to a reputation management, or what you call it, um, event a few weeks ago, and they were talking about recruiters and how you should clean up your social media for recruiters, and I just
What?
thought, wow, this is so inauthentic. I mean, you have to kind
Mm,
of
mm,
edit your lifestyle almost just to kind of impress someone you don't know yet.
mm,
And the day I decided to make content about sexuality, I gave up all of those fears because I know that by making the choice I made, I was going to
mm,
open some doors but close many others, and I had to be
mm,
okay with that. So that was the
mm,
first reason that I don't really care about negative comments because I'm talking about a topic which is very vulnerable and
mm,
just require some kind of disconnection, I guess, and detachment.
mm. Yeah, as someone who worked at LinkedIn, I would say like that would be very much yeah, like that's like the one topic that no one really talks about. Like even to this day, I mean, you've been on LinkedIn, you've seen like no one really is doing what you're doing, right? It's very rare. So that's commendable. And yeah, it's like LinkedIn. It's funny because I do think in some other platforms like Instagram, like YouTube, like it is a little bit more okay to talk about the topic of sex and orgasm and all these different and pleasure and things like that. But on LinkedIn, it does feel like it's still a bit behind in that sense.
But I don't think it's a place to speak about that. I mean, for me, I consider it. Let me just turn this WhatsApp thing off. For me, I like to share the actual professional side of what I'm doing on LinkedIn as a
Mm,
content creator. So I think that is more generic. I have a lot to share, a lot of things that any type of content creator will relate to, and also any type of freelancer, location independent person. I have a lot to share about how I work, my productivity tips, the fact that I've had no alarm for 15 years, being a podcaster. So I have many themes that I want to talk about on LinkedIn, which have nothing to do with sexuality specifically. It's just
mm,
that I have chosen a topic which is very personal, and it's something that's the foundation of many people's lives decisions. So it's something we should talk about more. But I'm not trying to change LinkedIn to make it more sex positive. That wouldn't be my objective on there. I think I prefer to keep
mm,
my content on my message really on my own platforms, and then just use
mm,
adhere to the rules and just talk about the kind
mm.
of more work stuff on LinkedIn.
Interesting. So that's smart, right? Because you're still even catering. So it sounds like you've are very adaptable to each of the platforms, and you're in tune with like sort of the nuances of each. I guess you have to be, right, or else you could potentially get canceled. I guess that's one of
But
the.
yeah, I'm just much more than the sexuality content that I make, and I'm interested in many things, and that is a part of what I do. But I actually have a content creation mentor right now, actually, who's really helping me with content strategy, specializing in online. And he always says, I think I shared this with you in our interview. That he says LinkedIn, thought leadership, and then lifestyle on Instagram. So I'm trying to kind
Mm,
of work with that. Some posts do overlap, but I'm
mm,
trying to things about the food I eat, I would put on Instagram, but the fact that I'm actually making my food at home, which is part of home working from home, I would put that on LinkedIn because that's a kind of different
mm,
angle. And I
hmm,
think that's something I want to talk about in the future because I think it's really important to food at lunchtime is an important part of the day, and many people are just having, a sandwich behind their desk, which is not the
mm,
most self-loving way to have to eat at lunchtime. So I want to prioritize. My mission is to encourage people to prioritize pleasure. So I think
mm,
for me, I've been in the firing line many times because I used to work in media here in Spain. I live in Spain. I used to work for the biggest newspaper called El País, and I've written over 100 articles for their online version. And sometimes I had to do one or two a week. So that really put me in the firing line of negative comments. Because one thing is creating
mm,
content on your own platforms, because in general, those people who are coming, most of them do like you and support you. But
mm,
when your content is on someone else's platform, and it's a news site where people are looking
mm,
for politics news or the weather or just general, in whatever's going on in the world. And then they see this sex article in the corner and it can kind of rub them up the wrong way. And some of them don't care about who I am. So I was very much in the firing line a lot. But what got me onto really loving negative comments was that often when I wrote an article, they were always very provocative. This is about 10 years
mm,
ago now. The first few comments were really positive, like, yeah, great article, we agree.
mm,
Then the third or fourth was like, this is terrible, it's a scandal, it's blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yes, because I used to love it because I knew that these comments would create a debate among the comments in the
mm.
comment section. And
Yeah.
those articles were the ones that got to top 10, top five, and
Mm,
sometimes even number one. So I was just thrilled when I got those negative comments coming in because I knew that some people would defend me. I never intervened in those comments. And also the good thing about these comments was that they actually sometimes the negative comments didn't quite understand my message. So I thought, oh, my next article I'll clarify.
oh.
So it
Mm,
was actually there was a lot of good that came from the
mm.
negativity. Mm.
That's a good point. As someone, I just started live streaming more recently. Maybe I've done like 40 or 50 live streams so far. And to
My
your point,
second.
oh yeah.
Right. Yeah, definitely. My first one was with you, so it was
Oh, cool.
busy, yeah. Mm.
Um, but to your point, there's sometimes people that will say controversial things, and then but it was, and then I would be like panicking sometimes. I'd be like, oh my God, are they like, is this too much? But to your point, it actually got more viewers because like people would kind of chime in and be like, hey, that's not cool. Like Muslim people are amazing, or and sometimes like but it's interesting because it's also in my mind, it's like, oh, like these are things that I don't really think about regularly, but then you see people going off in the comments, and I'm like, wow, like this is like actually an important topic. So sometimes I used to run away from those types of topics, but now I kind of invite them more, and I'm like, I'll just let them debate it out in the comment section, and I'm just like sitting there like, okay, this is interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah, but so in media, so it sounds like obviously you've had a lot. I mean, I'm sure, was it an initial like, because you have to reframe that, right? Or were you from the beginning, even within like the first few times you received negative comments, like even at that early on, you still embraced it?
Yeah, because I think overall it was very positive, and I mean I created my job at a time when the word influencer didn't even exist, So for me it was a massive privilege to write about sexuality. I also used to do fetish photos, so I used to actually provide the artwork of my for my articles. So I was really an all-round artist. It was a
Huh.
massive expression, personal expression, and to be paid for it. I mean, I felt absolutely, felt like the most luckiest girl in the world. It was amazing.
Mm.
So that was the most important thing for me. And also I was very grateful because some of the comments were about what I wrote. They weren't personal towards me. So I'm very, very
Mm.
grateful
Hmm.
about that. Because I mean, sometimes, you see with anyone who's very, prolific in the public eye, they get some very cruel,
Mm.
personal, scathing comments. And I didn't get to that
Mm.
level, fortunately. So that was nice. But sometimes, it was harder than others because I had lots of peaks and troughs in terms of my journey of growth. And sometimes I
Mm.
wonder what's better, exponential growth or gradual growth
Huh.
when you're in the public eye, because sometimes it's a lot to take in. You have to have a lot of, hard skin about how people, and be okay with being misunderstood, because that's the
Mm.
big thing. You have to be okay with being misunderstood and being criticized and just let go of it.
Mm.
So when it's a gradual process, you kind of get used to it. But there were some times
Mm.
when I did some big media campaigns because I wrote 3 books here in Spain, some with Penguin Random House and really big publishers with big marketing campaigns. So I did a
Mm.
lot of press, and sometimes I would be, Twitter would be going insane. I was getting mentioned several times a
Huh.
day. Or I wrote a very controversial article once about something called wife school, about this woman who was a former mistress who was creating this wife school to prevent husbands from cheating. And I just thought it was an interesting phenomenon. But then all these feminist organizations kind of
Huh.
really put me in, were really attacking me like for 3 days online. For the first few hours, it was kind of funny, but then it got too much. And I was never saying that I agreed with it. I was just saying this
Mm.
exists. Do you think?
Hmm.
And I think feminism is about choice. It's not about telling me what to think. So it was
Mm.
very ironic, actually. But yeah, it got a bit too much near the end. And I can't imagine what it's like for some people just to be, have that level of attention all the time, because you have to
Yeah.
get to a point where you must disconnect and detach
Hmm.
from it. Mm.
I forgot which famous person said this, but this is a cliche. It's like people want to be famous, and so he's like, I wish everyone would become famous for one day so they know what it's like, you know. And I think the essence of what the celebrity was trying to say is like, you think you want the fame, but you don't. Most people wouldn't know what to do with it, and there's a reason why they fly in like private jets or terminals because they don't have any peace, right? I think was it Anthony Bourdain, I believe. I think it was like a C-list celebrity was saying like uh yeah, was it? I don't know. It was someone, but he had dinner with Anthony Bourdain, and he was just like, does it get tiring?" Like, and he just like, I mean, like it is what it is, like. But he was just saying like, I thought I got a lot, but he's like, you. Oh, okay, okay, I remember this. I'll never forget this because I'm a big Tony Robbins fan. He would be hanging out with billionaires because he would coach a lot of billionaires, and some of these billionaires weren't very well known, right? Maybe they were well known in the finance space and people that are in corporate, but they weren't well known. Like Tony Robbins, I would say at this point, it's like a household name, right? And
Mm.
Tony at the time, he wasn't making a lot. I think his net worth was only a couple $1 million at the time. This is earlier on in his career, and he said that everywhere we go, like like people would go up to Tony Robbins every day, every like 10 minutes, like whenever they went, and he's like the billionaire was like, I want what you have. Like I would rather, because people would say, Tony, like you've changed my life, like that, like or you changed my kid's life or my dad's life, and like I just want to say thank you. And he's like, I'm a billionaire, and like I never get people saying that to me, and that really stuck with me. And I was like, wow, like that's interesting, right? Because I'm sure, and Tony was being very vulnerable about saying like he's like, I want what you have, right? Because to the
Yeah.
billionaire, because he's like, in my mind, I'm only worth a few $1 million, but I know that you're this world-renowned like person, like the top hedge fund manager in the world, right? So it's just interesting how we always want what the other person has.
Yeah, I think it's nice to have to be paid for your passion. And for me, it was like a lifestyle thing as well to be, have my art funding my lifestyle. That was a really cool place to be. But then there
Mm.
was sometimes, um, I think because I was kind of locally well known where I live now in Barcelona, Spain, it was kind of fun. And I did get to my ego sometimes. But then it made me a bit more aware about privacy because you have a part of yourself which is very public. And then my private side of me became even more private. So,
Hmm.
I mean, it was a time of, let's say, 2016. I think when Tinder came out, I just knew I could never do Tinder because I was too well known. I mean, I was literally for 8 or 9 years constantly in newsstands in some publication. So
Wow.
I have 8 boxes of like one per year in my
Wow.
spare room. So I was always in print. I witnessed the death of print media as well during that time.
Hmm.
But in that time, I was even on newspaper front pages, magazines.
Wow.
It was kind of cool for my ego, but yeah, there's a price to pay with those things. And sometimes I felt like if I had no makeup on one day, I wanted to I felt sometimes if I wore makeup or not, that I was choosing whether I wanted to be seen or not, but people see
Hmm.
you anyway. So it's a kind of
Hmm.
weird thing. So I just go out with a hoodie and no makeup on, and then someone's texting me on Twitter saying, "Oh, I saw you here." And I'm like, "Oh my God." So sometimes that would happen
Huh.
quite a lot. So people were recognizing me without actually coming up to me and saying hello. So
Huh.
that was a kind of a weird sensation.
That's interesting. So people always equate like fame to like making a lot of money. They must assume that you're like a multi-millionaire, right? Is that the case usually, or is that not? I don't know, because I guess like when I was younger, I always equate people who are like even like Instagram famous or YouTube famous as like really rich. But what I'm learning now that I'm like in this space a lot more, it's like that's not always the case, right?
Well, here in Spain, I think it's a much smaller market, so it's different.
Hmm.
But I was doing better than most people, but still, it wasn't, I wasn't living in a mansion or anything like that. I was living a
Yeah.
very comfortable life compared to the locals.
Hmm.
But then what happened because of my status in the Spanish media, I started to receive lots of sex toys, and then these brands wanted me to do reviews. So gradually, my media profile went down, and then my
Hmm.
content creation on my own platforms increased on
Huh.
YouTube, on my website. And then I switched to English, and that was just incredible because before that, I was doing everything in Spanish. And then doing things in English for me, I mean, all my audience now, 95% is US. So it's incredible now
Oh.
because I'm very far
Huh.
away from from people who are actually watching my content, which is kind
Huh.
of nice, actually. So now I'm in the living the best of both worlds in terms that in the sense that I can live locally in an anonymous way because no one knows who
Hmm.
I am anymore. It's that everyone's forgotten about me. And then
Hmm.
people who know me are very far away, so I can
Huh.
walk down the street and just not worry about not being recognized or anything or
It,
what I dress like.
yeah,
Yeah.
what you're saying kind of reminds me of like it is interesting, right? Because there's so many different communities and so many different pockets. Like I would say
Mm.
I'm like I guess I'm pretty well known in like the tech world, tech sales world. Like, like people would be like, oh yeah, I remember like you used to do all these events at LinkedIn and like, but it's like in the grand scheme of life, like I'm obviously not that famous, right? So it's just interesting how so I'm curious, like, have you ever done tours where like you'd be like, hey, I'm in New York City for today and just post on social media and then people come out to see you? Have you done stuff like that
Never
or
done that because I think because here in Barcelona, where I used to live in a place in an area where squatting was quite common, so I would never post in real time when I wasn't there because it was
uh
too much of a risk because you could come back and then you've got squatters in your apartment or something like that. And also,
uh
I think I've had intentions of. I think I'm in person. I'm kind of a bit more shy, and what I like for me,
huh,
I see a big difference between being well known in media, because I was working on radio stations. I've done a few TV appearances, not many,
huh,
and magazines. I was a GQ columnist. I've done Playboy Spain.
hmm,
So and El Pai is the biggest newspaper, which is like the equivalent of New York Times. So that for me is a very different thing being in mainstream media because you are seen by many people who are not your followers. Whereas when you're on your own platforms, your LinkedIn, your social media, your website, your YouTube, the people who are coming to you is quite niche and they're coming because of
hmm.
they're interested in your topic. So you can
uh
still maintain that anonymity. And that for me is the best of both worlds, because you get
Hmm.
the perks of working in something where, you have recognition and it's funding your lifestyle. You're kind of living from your passion. You're in charge of what you
Hmm.
do. But at the same time, you have that anonymity. You go to the
Hmm.
supermarket, no one knows who you are, and
Hmm.
etc. So that's kind of cool. But then there's a whole new thing about, those types of comments on. I've made some videos which have had, very negative comments, and I kind of leave them all there. That's another thing I want to talk about here, because
Hmm.
I think there are some creators who try to curate their comment section to make it all look like it's really good, and it's
Hmm.
everyone's supportive and everyone is agreeing with the message. But I think it shows a lot of strength of character to leave it all there,
Hmm.
and just not intervene and just kind of, just
Hmm.
leave it all there, and let people disagree with you, and be okay with that. Mm.
Yeah, there's definitely power in that. Right? Because I think to your point, social media, generally speaking, is very polished, right? It's very airbrushed, it's very filtered for the most part, right? So I personally I identify more with the folks that can show both sides, right? Because I also don't me personally I don't like it when people skew too much on the other end where like that social media is just bashing everything and just more negative. If it's all negativity I don't like, but I personally I like a good balance, like a 50-50 split where it's like this is the real side, but then also I want to acknowledge you for all the cool stuff you've done as well, right? But I think if it's too far one, then I'm just like, like this person is just like the highlight reels. But if it's too much on the other side, then I'm just like, okay, like I'm like now I'm getting too worked up and I'm getting, and I don't like that either. So I don't know. I like a good balance.
I think it's just about finding what works. Right now, I'm in a stage of experimentation with different types of content, because I have this content mentor right now. So I'm trying different things like get ready with me. I did a
Hmm.
tasting test for vegan cheese yesterday. So I'm trying to just experiment with different types of content and see what works and what I enjoy. Yeah.
I feel like that's a lot of people's dreams, like just to be able to like the average, if you take a teenager who's like 13, 14 years old and you're like, hey, like, what do you want to do for a living? I think they would say kind of what you're doing right now, right? It's like I think are the newer generation, I guess they're called Gen Z now. Their I think their favorite thing, like if you ask, I think the most common answer is like, oh, I want to be like a famous YouTuber, and that it seems like that's what you're doing, just experimenting and just trying and just living, just doing what you enjoy.
Well, it's interesting. Last week, actually, I made a video about that. I did a get ready with me while I talk about imposter syndrome, and this is interesting because you're an imposter syndrome coach, I believe, as well. So it's interesting because I've had a lot of imposter syndrome in my life, and I never wanted to be a YouTuber or a content creator. These opportunities came to me because I
Hmm.
was did a book promotion about 10 years ago, and I did a video interview, and for a right-wing newspaper, the rival to El País, the El Mundo, which is another big newspaper. And then someone from a TV station saw it, and they said that I was very telegenic, and they wanted to give me a vlog, like a video blog. And I was terrified, but I needed the money because I was freelance. So I was thinking, what can I do on here? So these things kind of came to me, and also in terms of YouTube, my clients who I was doing written reviews for on my website, they wanted me to do videos on YouTube. So I
Huh.
was just thrown into this position of feeling really uncomfortable. Just pressing the record button is very intimidating if you're not used to it. Even some people can't handle listening to the sound of their own voice, So looking at
Yeah.
yourself on camera, trying to, embrace what you look like, what you sound like, what you're saying, the nerves just from that record button. I had to do all of that, but I just did it because I was getting paid to, and people wanted me to do it. But it was never me saying, yeah, I want to be a YouTuber.
Huh.
So it took me a very long time, because some of my videos, they were scripted at the beginning. I used to kind of record on my laptop and have these post-its all around and try and not make it look like I was looking at all these different post-its.
Oh,
It took me 3 hours to make two videos of 1 minute each. It was just terrible,
wow.
and it was so wooden. But I really wanted to do it. It was like one of those feelings where, when you go to the gym, you don't really want to go, but after you feel really good. So that's
Mm.
how it felt about videos. And
Huh.
so in 2018, in May, I did a 30-day challenge. I uploaded every single day. First one was like really wooden. And then by day 24, I started to loosen up a little bit and then
Huh.
made one take videos. And now I make one take unedited videos. And it's just such a
Uh,
great feeling to
hmm.
be happy in my skin on video. It's taken a really long
Yeah.
time.
See,
Mhm.
in some ways, I wish I was more like you because I was always like a one take, everything I do one
Oh
take, right?
wow.
Which is like great, but then sometimes I wish I would have more of a, I guess you can call it like a standard of excellence where it's like, okay, like how would I actually make something that, well, I don't know. It's like we always want what the other person has, right? So for me, I'm like, oh, that's amazing that 3 hours for like a two, like I would never be able to. I hate to say never because that seems like that's like almost like a limiting belief, but it'd be very difficult for me to because my ADHD would kick in and I would just be like this is too hard, like I give up, like. So but it sounds like you were able to. So that's what you were. Now you don't do stuff like now you don't spend 3 hours to do a 2 minute, like never
You
anymore.
have just press record and do it, there's no script.
Yeah.
I might have a couple of bullet points, but that's about it really. So I just go
Mm,
into it. And same with my podcast. Podcast is interesting because without the visuals, um, I find that on my monologues, I've revealed many personal things, a lot more. I've just been in my
yeah.
room on my own and I'm talking to the wall, and I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my God, it's a very strange feeling. But
So,
one thing that I find is strange with friends and personal life is that I know where the line is, but a lot of people don't, in terms of what you share and what you keep private.
hmm,
So that's something anyone who wants to be a content creator, you have to have that very clear in your mind, like where the limits are. Because I think
hmm,
invulnerability is kind of a fashionable term now. A lot of people want to be vulnerable and authentic, and then some people
hmm,
can use that just to get likes,
hmm,
sharing a sad story, or
hmm,
but you have to think about what's the intention behind everything, and
hmm.
okay with this being here forever. So.
That's so deep. I feel like we could talk about this topic forever. So I definitely think vulnerability gets a lot of likes, but I do think people can tell if it's like scripted vulnerability versus this is like genuine, like just straight from the heart. Or do you argue that actually, if you if you're really not manipulative, because that sounds like bad, but if you're like really good at it, you can still fake vulnerability. Can you tell the difference usually? Or
I don't know what I have seen in many people who've like blown up or gone big online. They've actually it's been a moment of vulnerability and authenticity that's actually propelled them into this um period of growth. So I think you
hmm,
have to so when people see that they can be inspired by it for all the wrong reasons, I think.
hmm,
So for me, I just have to think about, check in with myself and think, what do I what's my message today? And am I okay with people knowing this about me?
hmm,
Because I think it's you have an element of storytelling, but also there has to be a takeaway for the person watching as
hmm.
well.
So
Mm.
so I'm curious because you've been doing it for a while now. Like, have you seen that? So, is vulnerability? Do you think people overdoing it now, or do you think there's some people that are really good at like the vulnerability thing, but then because I do think once you kind of like and then you say they cross it sounds like sometimes people cross boundaries where it's like their partner might get upset if they heard that or they're
Mm.
like, is that what you're saying? Like sometimes when people don't know where to draw the line, a lot of people get affected, whether it's like their mothers or their families. And is that what you're referring to?
Well, I can give you a kind of more specific example. Like recently, I was featured in a newspaper here in Spain just recently, and this is like 10 years after I was known in Spain. And this particular article went viral. It was really big. And
Huh.
I found people were using my name and image on Twitter and making tweets about me and making up stuff about me. And I had to kind of like let it all go. It's been so, and I was talking to some of my very close friends about my personal life and we were sharing some stuff. And I was thinking, what we share here doesn't go any further because what happens a lot with groups of friends is that they will talk about me or whoever with another friend that I don't know. So, I have a friend who's
Mm,
going through this and blah blah blah. But in my case, that's very dangerous because someone can go onto my Instagram and they know all this stuff about me, but they don't actually know me. And they're knowing all the personal stuff that doesn't get shared. And I find that for me like crosses a line. So for me, discretion is becoming more and more important among my friends, you know. So
mm,
I'm trying to think now, can I tell you this? Can I not? Can I trust you?
mm,
Because everyone does that, you know. They say, "Oh, I've got this
mm,
friend going through this," and blah blah
mm,
blah. You see their Instagram, thinking, "Bloody hell, I know all this about you, and you don't know who I am." So that
mm,
kind of thing is very sort of sensitive area for me right now because I'm starting to
mm,
think about what is sacred and private to me right now
mm,
and what do I want to share. Because the great thing about being online for such a long time is that I don't feel that I need to get vulnerable or authentic just to get likes or follows. The right people will come. I'm okay with it. I value my privacy and
mm,
I'm all about the message because I had a spiritual awakening in 2017 and that really shifted how I create content. Because before that time, I was just thinking about money and, you know, isn't this great? I get to talk about sex and I get paid for it. Amazing.
mm,
But then after that, it was like, what can I contribute to the world today? That was my thinking behind my content creation. So I kind of took
mm,
myself out of the equation and just kind of became a channeler or a messenger for
mm,
the message that I'm giving. So, because I mean, I am kind of, I do have a shy side to me. So doing
mm,
lives is kind of a little bit uncomfortable. It's something I wanted to
wow.
get into because I don't want to be like the obstacle in my own message.
Huh.
That doesn't make sense. So
Mm,
but I know that it's not really about me. It's about, because I think we've been talking about
mm,
before about vulnerability. I think when people share content, you have to see some kind of hope or some kind of evolution or growth
mm,
behind a story of great
mm,
pain or learnings, what have you. I think there
mm,
has to be a journey where you can think, oh, that was bad, but they've come here. What do they do? Well, maybe I can do that.
mm,
You know, that's the kind of thing. There has to be hope.
mm. Yeah,
Mm.
that's pretty deep. So, wow. So there's a couple things that I'm thinking here, and you're right. It's so I would say I'm the opposite, where it's actually more uncomfortable for me to do online things. Like, whereas like when I'm in person, I would say I'm much better. I'm a much better in person than I am online. But to your point, it does feel like a lot of famous YouTubers are the one. I guess that's the community I'm more spending a lot more time with nowadays. It seems like a lot of these YouTubers are the opposite, where they're like, no, like that's why I'm a YouTuber because I'm terribly afraid of like going out in person, but I'm very comfortable with speaking to, to the camera. And I think I found that fascinating. And I'm like, huh. Because I do meet a lot of like people that are very popular in person, but they don't even have a social media following. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, how do you do that nowadays? But they're just like, oh, like I just don't, I just don't like social media. But I'm like, oh, but you go to networking events like every day. Like that's so interesting. So it's just weird how do you find that to be the case?
I think it's interesting as well because I tend to attract a lot of people in my life who are very private and not on social media. And I think that's really cool. And to some
Yeah.
degree, I'm not really on social media. I mean, I exist on social media for work, but in general, my personal life stays off social media.
Huh.
And I think that for me, I don't know if I would be using it at all if I wasn't a content creator because nothing about
Wow.
I try and keep, relationships, friends, or a family, all of that is off
Huh.
social media.
That's so interesting. I would say I lean more towards the opposite where I love sharing personal stuff, but I'm like I don't like talking about work as much. It's weird. Like
Other
yeah.
things I can talk about, lifestyle things, which are still. But what happens with me a lot is if I tag a friend or something, so I do like to do, occasionally I will, do some posts with friends, and then if I tag them just out of politeness, then they start getting all of my followers following them, and they're like, oh my God, and then they're like a private. They have one of these, these private accounts, so they're not really.
Huh.
So I feel a bit bad about that sometimes. But
Huh.
in general, I try to
Ah.
avoid that kind of thing. Also, a lot of personal stuff that I share, I don't share in real time. That's another thing that I've seen other creators do as well. Like
Uh,
sometimes you'll see a creator come out and say, "Oh, I've just left a toxic relationship," and you're thinking, "Wow, so when I
hmm.
interviewed you for the podcast, you were going through that, but you never talked about that because it's
Ah.
People, I think privacy, it becomes more important when you are public. You know, that,
Hmm.
that line distinction.
Yeah, yeah. My wife personally hates it, like how public it's like she thinks I was public 5 years ago when like every time we go to New York City, like people just go up to me and be like, "Oh, Davidson, it's been so long," and she hated it now. Now that I guess I'm becoming more public every month, she hates it because she's like, I don't know. She's just like doesn't like it because she's like, oh, I feel like a lot of these random people like they're asking way too many questions about me and like, where's your wife? Like, oh, I would love to meet your wife sometime. Like, like you talk about her sometimes and but I try not to talk about her that much, but like it's impossible to not talk about marriage. So people are like, oh, like how's your wife doing? And I'm like, oh, she's doing well, but I try to set boundaries on that, but she's like she doesn't like it. She's like, why are they always asking about me? It's like they're just curious. But I don't know. It's interesting, I guess, is what I'm saying. But yeah, she doesn't like it because she's like people always like asking because they'll like watch a video about you and they'll be like, oh, like I'm sorry to hear like Davidson's like going through something, and she's just like, he is like what? But to your point, it's like sometimes it's like months later, right? But it's just interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I keep my struggles not in real time at all. So I talked about things after the fact once I've evolved and learned from them, you know.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say I definitely do it. I try to do like in person because, or not in real time because that's when it's like the most heavy. So like
Mm.
I'm like, oh, I think this like someone will get value out of this realization. So for me, but but sometimes it is hard for me to I would say like when you said that it's hard for me to set boundaries. Like I think I overshare too much because but then I think that's actually how I've gotten like people that are like really invested in me because they're just like, wow, like I would never be able to say what you just said. But then to your point, like the neg all of the negative comments I've got was more of like the oversharing where they're like, hey, like, if you're trying to work in corporate, you probably shouldn't be saying stuff like that. So it's always like, and now I'm glad we're having this because this is very much for me too because I'm definitely afraid of like even now like even after this I'm sure like there'll be days where I'll be like oh God like why are so many people having to text me about this. So we'll see.
But I think you have to just go back to what's the intention, and just once you are clear about that, then you
Mm,
once you know the reason behind, so that it's not attention, it's not likes, it's not follows, but
mm,
it's okay to be vulnerable and share something you're going through.
mm,
'Cause that will resonate with someone else because we're all, as humans, we all go through very similar things, you know.
mm.
Well,
Yeah,
that
that
happened to me about 4 years ago, actually. The worst thing that happened to me in my life, I actually woke up one day with Bell's palsy. Do you know what Bell's palsy is? I
mm-mm.
had facial paralysis, like the whole of my
Oh
left
my
side of
God.
my face. It was the most, it was
Whoa,
such it was just an awful thing.
oh
Um,
wow.
I mean, imagine like working from your image, and then I suddenly wake up and my eye won't close, my mouth was like droopy,
Oh
and I
wow.
just cried, all day for about, and I didn't get back, and I didn't get my smile back for about a month. So I had to do facial yoga, I had to do all these different things,
Whoa.
take steroids, and it was a very, very deep introspective moment for me. And
Hmm.
when I was looking at information online, I saw all these people sharing their story of Bell's palsy and how their faces got
Hmm.
better. That really helped me a lot. I was
Hmm.
thinking about doing the same to kind of turn it into content, but then I just thought, no, I need this time just to be with me and just
Hmm.
be offline for a while. And then the day I was really, it's funny, it wasn't funny at the time, but the day I got the all clear from the neurologist, it was the time of the masks, so I was wearing my sunglasses, wearing a hat, and wearing a mask, and I was in a museum, and I walked into a glass door, and then the sunglasses went here, and I had this cut, so I had to be taken in an ambulance, and
What? Oh my
get
God.
stitches in the black eye for about another 3 weeks. So it was just a whole summer of issues with my face, and
That's crazy.
it was very humbling. So I'm just thinking, I used to wake up in the morning and just touch my face and just say, check if I could smile. It
Huh.
was a horrible feeling. I just thought, if I can get my smile back, I'll be
Hmm.
happy. That's all I want.
Huh.
So it was a very humbling time for me. So I talked about that a year after it happened, because I mean, I remember the day, it was
Huh.
18th of June. I'll never forget. And so I made a big post about my smile, and I've made speeches about it for Toastmasters.
Oh,
At least I can smile, So I really waited until I got my smile back because it's a horrible feeling. You don't know if it's going to get better or not.
huh.
But I mean, I wanted to be one of those content creators who was going to make it better for someone else. But I was in a moment of crisis, so
Hmm.
I was just really struggling. So maybe the content I would have made at the time wouldn't have been, wouldn't have been that, inspiring. Would have been,
Hmm.
but I mean, it wasn't the right thing to do. I just thought it was the best.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It it's a tricky dilemma, right? Because I think depending on how like you're definitely a lot more famous than I am for sure. But I would say it's a weird like meta, right? Because sometimes like when you're going through something like I think most human beings don't have to think like, oh, is this what I'm going through right now going to serve more people, right? They just go through it and like they just process it, usually like normal with a few friends or themselves. But yeah, you're it's interesting now you mention it. Like yesterday was a perfect example where I'm like, I think I just snapped out of a 6 month depression. And then it was like, but it was so clear to me. And I was like, oh my God, like I feel like this actually would help people because like a lot of when I was going, I didn't even know I was going through a 6 month depression, but then I was like, I was like, because I didn't want to work for like I was, barely able to work. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. But then to your point, my first instinct is like, oh my God, like this would make great content because I think my intention is like I think a lot of people and then it was like, oh, it's mental health awareness month, and I was like, oh, it's also Asian Pacific Islander month, and I'm like, oh, maybe I could make a video about what it's like some of the insecurities that come with being like an Asian male in America, So then, but it's like I'm like thinking like, or should I just process this? And then so I think I spent 5 hours just processing and just taking a walk in nature, and then I was like, all right, I'm good. Like now, let's make content
Yeah,
on
I'm
it,
with you.
Yeah. But it's interesting, right? Because I think most people don't think like have to worry about that. But I'm just like, but in my mind, I'm like, no, like my intention is like, I think this will serve, even if it serves one person, like my job is done, So it's just like interesting how that's like something that we always have to think about when you're in this game.
Yeah, and it depends on how it makes you feel as well. Because I mean, when I had Bell's palsy, it was 4 years ago, so I was in a different place in my journey.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not. I mean, my whole existence online then was just sponsored content and making the odd different
Hmm.
video. But
Hmm.
now I'm really in the space of holistic self-love. I want to bring more of my my life, all the things that have helped me, like all the books I've
Hmm.
read, all the meditations, just lifestyle practices, self-love practices. I want to bring all of that in because I know that all of the content and philosophies that I have help a lot of people around me in my real personal life, and I want to
Hmm.
bring that to a bigger audience.
Hmm.
So actually now, because it was interesting, because when we were making the the text to advertise this talk, and
Hmm.
it came up with ChatGPT came up with empowerment coach, and it got me thinking, could I be an empowerment coach? And after that, I thought, no, I'm going to be holistic self-love accountability mentor because I don't want to be a
Hmm.
coach because that would be a new skill set. But I would like to help others in their holistic self-love journey in
Hmm.
terms of things like gratitude, but making them accountable for
Hmm.
different practices, reading different books. Because I've had many, many dark times in my life, and I've had to turn to self-help to help me. Because I mean, I also made another speech for my Toastmasters club called "Pain is the greatest teacher," and I really believe that. Because if you watch any of the great TED talks,
Hmm.
a lot of the structure is like, I'm here now, but it wasn't always like this. There's
Hmm.
an evolution story. So when you are hitting rock bottom or something really hard is difficult is happening to you, this is an opportunity to grow and learn. You can't just stay in that
Hmm.
space. I always think,
Hmm.
you can process, but then you've got to think, what am I going to do about it? So,
Hmm.
and that's an interesting part of the content, rather than
Hmm.
dwelling in the dark moments. Mm.
So that's interesting because I assume that anyone that gets to your level of success on Instagram or YouTube, you have to be pretty like you have to share about your life pretty vulnerably. So it's interesting. So it sounds like you were still able to achieve that amount of success even without having to necessarily like I don't want to call it oversharing, but like really letting people into like your deep, dark inner secrets and stuff like that, right?
I've shared so many personal things. I mean, just last week, it was my birthday dinner last week, and I there was a guy there who's done 4 TED Talks, and he gave a keynote speech in my Toastmasters club. And he talked about, you can't be nervous on stage because you've got to think about that one person who needs your message, like you just said now. And that got me
Yeah.
thinking, it's not serving the purpose if you. So anyway, I told him that he inspired me to make the video about Get Ready With Me while I talk about imposter syndrome. And he says to me, you can talk about sex, but not imposter syndrome. I mean, like, the opposite of most people, because I think
Yeah,
for me, sex
yeah,
is a natural thing to talk about.
yeah.
So I've kind of done the opposite. So I've shared many, many, many things about my life, my personal, my emotional growth,
Huh.
lots of stories, different times of my life. Very always not at the time it was happening, stories that happened a long time ago or
Mm,
living in Spain. I came to Barcelona on a night train with 400 euros, I mean, and 2 backpacks and a job
yeah.
on doors selling fiber optics. I mean, and I could barely speak Spanish. So a lot of things that I've gone through, I've shared, even how I lost my virginity or, different experiences which are highly personal, but there's always a message or a purpose or that I wanted to share. It wasn't just about me talking about me,
Hmm.
um, and never in real time. I've always kept my
Hmm.
relationships offline,
Hmm.
so yeah.
Ah, interesting. That's so cool. Like I'm sure we'll be friends for a while because I do think it's almost like the opposite where I would say like I can only do it in real time and then it's hard for me to remember stuff like back. Like it just doesn't have the same resonance. So even something as like can be inspiring that happened like 10 years ago, I'm just like yeah, but like I can't even tell it good anymore because like that emotion has like sailed so long ago. But I'm like, but if I took the time, like to your point, and like I actually like was present and like try to bring back those emotions, it probably would be helpful, right? But it's just like I'm like, dude, it was so long ago. I feel weird even sharing about something 10 years ago, even if it is inspiring, you know? So I don't know. So for me, like I can only do real time because that's when I feel it and I'm like, oh wow, like this emotion is so heavy. And but stuff that I think if I could go back and like relive those, I'm like, oh, this probably would be very inspiring for someone to hear, you know? Yeah.
That's always everything's happens at the right time, I believe, so
Mm,
what feels
mm.
right,
Yeah. So
everything
yeah.
will be okay will work for someone, something will work for someone. Mm.
So this is interesting. I appreciate you sharing about it. Um, it sounds like what your Toastmaster, your TED Talk person like it's so you made me think about this too because I'm like how do I communicate this but it seems like each of the platform there's like different layers of your stuff that you show right it's like Facebook there's something TikTok Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn and Snapchat etc right it's almost like each platform has their own so how would you describe the other platforms because you said that lifestyle is more Instagram like business. So how would you describe some of the other platforms and how would you relate to it in terms because it sounds like you're thoughtful in the way you deliver it in all these different platforms.
Well, I think for anyone who's a content creator, the only 3 things that you own, which is very important, and that's your email list, and that's your newsletter, your
Yeah.
website, and podcasts, and that's what you really have to focus on. And I
Mm,
think people make the mistake by thinking that social media is where it's all at. I mean, a content creator and an influencer is not always the same thing, or personal brand and influence is not always the same thing. But
mm,
I think social media is an amplifier of your message, and your message should really be on your website, on your podcast, and on your newsletter, so you can communicate the things you're doing, like your retreats, your online courses,
mm,
etc. So I think about, I mean, for me, often I love the AI in TikTok for videos. So often when
mm,
I make a reel, I'm actually making it first in TikTok. I just find it easier. I love the
mm.
AI. I love the effects and the transitions. And then I use the
Huh.
same video with different music in Instagram, and then I use the same video and make it a short on YouTube as well.
Mm,
And I'm also I feel more comfortable with long form video. So
mm.
actually making short form and just speaking to my phone, it's not something that feels comfortable for me right now, but I actually have
Yeah.
this mental I've mentioned a few times. and he's doing lots of practices with me to kind of get me into on the fly, on the moment, just not really thinking.
Uh,
And so we
huh.
have a lot of. He's giving me homework. That's probably think something that you're probably better, much better at. You do that anyway. So I
Huh.
think for me, that long form feels nicer because what I like about long form unedited content is that I want my audience to sit down and relax. I don't want all these
Mm.
jump cuts because if you think about all the jump cuts, they're making people like very
Yeah.
jerky and kind of very how do you say it, on edge, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
think about how bad the original version was to edit every couple of minutes. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
that's
crazy.
terrible. So I just think it's much better. And if you mess up, you just kind of get back onto it. It's a much better process. So I feel very comfortable
Mm.
with doing an unlimited amount of time on a YouTube video. So that's my
Mm.
long um,
Yeah.
podcast is like another area because I know it's mine. So
Mm.
it's very niche, and that's for people who want that type of content, like a long form content. And
Mm.
I'm using that more for kind of interviews I'm creating the content that I consume on my podcast because I don't just consume sexuality because I've done that sexuality
Mm.
for years now. So I'm interested in personal development, spirituality, and those are the experts that I'm speaking to. So my podcast is an expression of what I'm really interested in personally.
Mm. Mm.
That's interesting. And then I would like, and then I'm using Opus Pro, which is amazing. So I'm using
Mm.
that on my interviews for my podcast interviews just to get the snippets and get them onto TikTok and
Uh,
to the Orgasmic Lifestyle, like Instagram, which is a little bit neglected at the moment. So what else do I use? And then Pinterest, I just use the other things as amplifiers. When I have content, I just kind of share everywhere, share on Twitter,
huh.
share on Tumblr, Pinterest. So I don't really, I kind of admire people who can tweet because that's hard to get some
Yeah.
thought to. I
I
find
can't do
thought
it.
harder.
Yeah.
But
Huh.
some people are genius, some of the tweets are hilarious how people can
Yeah.
and think, wow,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
reflecting on current affairs or what have you. But that's something
Mm.
I love. But I only use Twitter as a news source when I'm
Uh,
looking to see what's trending in the world, so I don't have to get too deep.
um,
And then I just share links of my own content on there. So
okay.
I don't actually use it to express myself
Mm.
really. So all the social media for me just is basically amplifiers. And someone told me, I
Mm.
can't remember who, some expert, just to focus on a couple of them, and then
Mm.
you can't be big on all of them.
Yeah,
So
it's so I love everyone's take on this. And this is why it's great to have these long form, like this is like better because you there's actually substance, right? Whereas to your point, with sometimes the short form, I almost felt like I was selling out, right? It's like, oh, like short form, like but it felt like I'm diagnosed with ADHD, and even short form is way too ADHD for me because it's almost like it's like if someone only has the attention span to listen to 2 seconds of what I have to say, like it's like, is that true to who I am? Like, do I want to be that person that's only able to deliver 2 second value? It's like, no, like I want to be able to do 10, 15, like, this, like I love a lot more. But to your point, like this video might not get 1,000 views, but it'll probably get like 300, 400, 500 views, right? Which is good. But so when I was chasing like the metrics, I was like, oh, I guess I have to get good at like short form. But then to your point, it took me like an hour to kind of figure out like, okay, this is a good short form thing that will get like 10,000 views, but it's like 2 minutes. And I'm like, that's so not true to who I am, because it's like, would I rather get 10,000 like 5 second views, or would I rather get 10 solid true fans that would listen to the whole like 3 hour, like deep dive that I have with you or anyone else? I'm like, so then I had to go back. Now I'm like, okay, no, I would rather do this. So now you can see I'm doing like LinkedIn lives every day now. But before I was like, oh, I got to figure out how to like cut and edit and like transition and all this stuff. And I'm just like, now I'm like, dude, I'm so glad I don't have to worry about that anymore. Cause it's like, I just felt like I was like selling my soul, you know? Yeah.
You think about when you think about the numbers, you got to think every number is a life. So
Mm,
think of it in terms of a restaurant. I mean, how many
mm,
people would be in this restaurant? Think about
mm,
the big restaurants because 300 people in a restaurant, I mean, that's a lot. And imagine all those
mm,
lives that watch the whole thing. I mean, that's kind of
mm.
cool. I think
True.
there's been an obsession sometimes with getting, thousands of views in a day. And a lot of those people, might not be high quality. The quality is
Mm,
the ones who are listening to your podcast, who are on your mailing list. And
mm,
those are the real, or even, buying your products, your
mm,
courses, your retreats. That's a space I want to get into right now. I want to get into
mm.
the kind of diehard fans. I want to
Yeah.
see those people, you
Huh.
know, so that those are the ones I want to really cultivate right now. So I'm really working on sharing more lifestyle on my Instagram because I have so many amazing lifestyle practices that I want
Mm,
to convert into content because I mean
mm,
I prioritize my self-love, self-care so much. I know it's a very important lesson for people, to actually have a breakfast, to sit down, to actually make time to read a book,
mm,
to have a home cooked lunch, to buy the best foods, to buy organic, to, prioritize your health,
mm,
etc. And just meditate, all these things that a lot of people are saying, but I want to do
mm,
it in a more unpolished way because that's how I see myself as well. So I like all my Instagram is no filter, no edit. I like to be
mm.
unpolished. And even like last week, I did a post on LinkedIn about working on a Saturday. Now my desk is a mess.
Oh yeah, I
I
saw that. Yeah, yeah. That
so
was
I
great.
like to show that style, or even I wasn't even dressed. I was in a kimono all day. So, I think that those are the types of things I want to do just to show the humanity of me
Mm,
and be okay with that. And just because I want to eliminate the obstacles of my
mm,
shyness, not let those things stop me. Because I just love
mm,
sharing a message. Because I know that when I was at school, maybe you can feel like about this too, but I mean, when I was at school, I felt like such a weirdo and I wanted to just fit in and be like everyone else.
mm,
But then when you grow up and you realize that to stand out is actually a gift
mm,
and you can really resonate, or your message will resonate with lots of misfits who,
mm.
it's actually cool not to fit in and not be like everyone else. Yeah.
I'll never forget this comment that one of I was part of the brand builders group, which is
I think you told me about that last time, so that you recommended it. Mhm.
yeah, I think you would love it because the quality of people are like us, like it's just like good people, right? Like people who are out to trying to change the world or deliver some sort of like inspiring message. But the guy that was the session was I think yeah, his name is Casey Dowdell. They call him like Cowboy Casey. Super funny dude, like hilarious dude. But he was like, and it was like the biggest light bulb moment I think I had in a while. But he's like, Davidson, like, have you ever watched The Greatest Showman? The one with Hugh Jackman.
No,
Um, he basically the movie is like very inspiring. Like when you watch it, you have to cry. It's like one of those things. But he was like a poor person that like I guess ended up marrying this person that came from wealth, right? So typical Romeo and Juliet type of story. And he created like the Ringling Brothers. He was the founder of the Ringling Brothers Circus. And in that um in the movie, he basically gathered all the misfits from all over the world, like all these crazy misfits that like didn't belong, that were like the parents locked them in the room, didn't show them, they were ashamed of them, and he created like this successful, like one of the most successful businesses like in America, and it grew to hundreds of locations. And he created the circus essentially. And then the circus burned down because all these people were like, hey, like get your weirdos out of here, like like they don't belong here, so they burned down the building. And then he was like, he gave up essentially. He's like, oh, I'm a failure, like I couldn't do anything. But then all the misfits got together. They're like, you believed in us. You're the only one that like saw potential in us, and like you made us feel like we're not only there's something wrong with us, but we need to embrace our weirdness, our misfits. And then so all they did was just create like a tent that's like, like very cheap to buy a tent. And that's how all that started. And I was like, and he's like, Davidson, like you're like Hugh Jackman. Like that's the reason why people gravitate towards you, because you're collecting all these misfits and you creating this community. And I was like, whoa. And I was like, I'm Hugh Jackman. That's so cool. But like I
it's
don't know
really
why, but
cool.
it was like the biggest breakthrough I had. I was like, oh, so I'm like maybe I should embrace that I'm like tr attracting like a lot of people in my Daring Hearts community, or people that were adopted or orphans, or um multiracial or bisexual or just like people that just don't fit in. And I'm just like, huh, like I wonder why these people are attracted to my content. But to your point, I think it's because like they're like I also felt like I didn't belong, you know. So
So as you're saying that, as you say that, you probably have a lot of stories from your past that you could share, that you could inspire people who are at that stage
yeah,
now from
yeah,
school. Like what I mean, there's some really interesting things you could probably share about that, about being a misfit at school. I mean, high school is a very hard time for most people.
yeah.
Especially if you're, all the hormones and just wanting to be popular, and the popular people are very intimidating,
Hmm.
you know. So
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is harder sometimes to share from that stuff because like you really have to like think about it. You're like, okay, like what was it like? What was I going through? What were the emotions? What was the feelings? What was my thoughts? So when I do that, like those tend to like really resonate. But then it's difficult because I'm like, there's a reason why I kind of brush that underneath the because it was very difficult, right? And I'm like, do I want to relive that? So that's for me, like when I do get to that, it does do pretty well. But then I'm like, oh, like I don't want to go there again, you know? It's like because it was
maybe that's a good,
traumatizing, some of it.
yeah, but that's a good point. If it's still, now and it feels raw, then that people will see that. And it depends on what, if you want to do it, 'cause you shouldn't do something because just for that one person in the audience. I think you've got to look after yourself first and foremost. You've got to, practice that self-love and
Mm,
come from a full cup. You've got to be
mm,
giving when you feel complete in yourself, and not take away from yourself just to give to someone else.
mm,
It's important. But for me, I find it very easy to remember these things because I mean, a lot of my work is actually writing about my life. So that's a real
mm,
fun. I mean, I live things and then I write about them and get paid for it. It's just
mm.
amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
right now I am the sole author of an erotic app called Satisfier, which is a sexual wellness brand, and I'm just writing about all times of my life, so it's really exciting. I'm reliving because a lot of beautiful moments,
Mm,
and then I go to a recording studio once a month to record them, to narrate the stories, and then I actually match the I block out the text in different colors, and then put different vibration patterns.
mm,
So people listen to my story, it starts going zzz. And then when you get to like the hot point of the narrative, it goes, so people can actually use a toy, listen to my voice, and just let their imagination flow. And for me in my stories, I always kind of acknowledge the inner narrative, or the inner dialogue of, oh my God, did I close the
mm,
windows? Can the neighbors here? The imperfections of those moments of
mm,
intimacy. I think it's really
mm,
important to share imperfection. I think that's very, very
mm.
inspiring.
No, I love what you just said. I think like it seems like you're thoughtful when you think about these things. Like I typically am like just go with the flow, but I do think there's something valuable about like just like okay, like let's sit down and like let's like actually intentionally like yeah. So I think it's not that I can't do it. I think it's just like I'm typically because I think when I was younger, I think I focused on the past too much, and I think that's unhealthy, right? And then in corporate, I guess like it's all about the future. It's all about like, yeah, I gotta like make this money so I can buy this brand new house and have this really cool car, and so then now it's like it's hard to figure out what's like a good balance, right? Because I don't want to dwell too much on the past, and then I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. I think when I share, I'm like, oh, like people probably have heard this before. Like I don't want to be, but then to your point, I'm sure you're probably gonna say something along, well, there's a lot of people who haven't heard. Wait, right? So that's like the balance where I'm like, oh, I don't want to keep repeating the same thing over and over again, you
I
know?
think a lot of the creators actually who are successful, they niche down so much and their message is the same in every video, just a different order. I
Yeah.
mean, if you watch a lot of people, like I used to watch this guy called Infinite Waters. Don't know if you know him, but he's a really
Mm.
fun YouTuber. And if you watch like three of his videos or even 10, he's got the same
Huh.
message, but in a different order. And it's very consistent. And people, that's why
Uh,
people go to them. They want to hear that message again. It's
huh.
very comforting. So So I think
Ah.
sometimes, and there's another creator I really like called Dan Coe. I would recommend him to you because
Oh
he
yeah,
talks,
he's great. I love him.
he's very
Yeah.
focused. I mean, he talks about Twitter a lot actually, and
Oh yeah.
writing, and working 4 hour days and things like that. But
Yeah. He's solid.
his
He's
message is over and over. His message is very consistent.
that's a good point.
But I do think as a creator though, that would get boring for me. I mean, I if I was doing the
Right.
same thing over and over for like the last 10 years, I would be bored. Because I mean, I've reviewed maybe 200 sex. I mean, I've got 1,000 videos on my YouTube channel. So a lot of them are
Yeah.
reviews now with reviews. I'm not exactly like wow passionate, but recently I went to a sex toy B2B fair and I met all of these people who watched my reviews just to know what to stock. And I even
Mm.
met this woman who was in Senegal who was watching my videos to promote pleasure in Senegal to kind of combat female genital mutilation. I mean, that's like huge.
Mm.
So I reconnected
Mm.
with my review videos, even though they don't really challenge me anymore. But I know that I do it
Huh.
well and it's serving people. So for me, I'll make other types of content that get me going, like
Mm.
more about the lifestyle or the books I'm reading.
Mm.
So, but one thing I think is really good to do is I mean, you're uploading quite a lot now, but I made a 30-day challenge a few times. I've done that for Vlogmas or for different times of the year. And it's really interesting because that when you have the same time of publication every day,
Mm.
people will come back and they'll make comments
Yeah.
and that will kind of inspire the next type of
Mm.
content. And what I learned from that was that at first I was just making like random videos about anything. But then what I
Huh.
realized is that people want to talk about relationships because relationships is like the
Mm.
PG side of sexuality. People want to talk about love, loneliness, and
Yeah.
relationships in general. And people have a lot to talk about that and a lot to
Uh,
and that's the kind of sore point for many people because there's all this focus on
huh.
career, career, career.
Mm.
People are neglecting their personal, emotional lives,
Mm.
and that's what people really want to consume. And then, anyway, what I found was what was working best for me wasn't my exposing myself so much, but it's just more about talking about who should pay on a date, and just talking about my
Mm.
ideas. And I was just bringing my ideas, not as an expert, just as someone who
Mm.
has an idea. And then other people would intervene in the comment section. And I found
Mm.
that that was the type of thing that was working the best because then it was always the same people coming back every day. And they would ask, what do you
Mm.
think about age gap relationships? Okay, we'll make a video
Yeah.
about that. So
Yeah, yeah.
it was really
Uh,
cool because you get to connect with the community and you get
mm.
to see what they want to hear from you.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that. There's like I have like a lot of followers from India and they're like loyal. Like yesterday I guess I didn't live stream and they're like, "Hey, you're not live streaming today?" And I'm like, "Bro, it's like one day that I didn't live stream." But they were like messaging me on Instagram too. They're like, "Hey, like we didn't see you posted. Is everything okay?" I'm like, "It's just one day, guys, like relax." But it's like to your point, it's like yeah, and then to your point, like I come with a sometimes I'll live stream with a like an idea. I'm like, oh, today I'm gonna talk about like imposter syndrome or whatever, right? But then in the comments they're like, hey, like what do you think about like this and this? And I'm like, this has nothing to do with imposter syndrome, but they want to know, right? They're just curious. They're like, well, I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on like making money or like whatever it is, like totally like or religion or like they're like, oh um what do you like when are you going to visit us in India, like we would love to meet you and or they'll be like just like totally other random topics. I'm like, oh, I guess sometimes people don't always want to talk about deep topics all the time. Sometimes it is just banter and I have to like sometimes I forget that because I'm so like I'm like, oh no, I want to add value, but then there's like the people keep coming back every day and then it's like I'm like, why do they come back? But it's like, oh, maybe they just are lonely and they just want to someone like they feel like I'm like a friend. So they always call me like besties. They're like, oh, me, you, and Aniket, we're all besties. And I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. But I don't know. It's just interesting how like the community, like I think I have to add value, but sometimes they just want to talk about like random stuff. They're just like, hey, like, well, how was your day? Like they're like, like what time, just like random stuff that I'm like, is this really what you guys want to be talking about? It's like, I don't know. It's weird, right? I don't know. It's like to me, it's just like, okay, I guess sometimes people just want to like goof around and just be silly. Because they'll ask me, they're like, would it be weird if I asked you to dance to this like Hindi song? And I'm like, all right, sure. And then I do it and they're dying. They're like, oh my God, I told all my friends about you. And like they posted it on their Instagram. And then I'm just like, just because I was like, did a funny dance, like, all right. And they're like, you're a really good dancer. And I'm just like, it was funny, and I was like, it definitely got me out of my comfort zone, you know. But
It's
yeah,
nice to be
it's
kind of
weird.
led by the audience as well. That's definitely a nice thing to see
Yeah.
what, as long as it resonates with what you want to say as well, you know.
Yeah, I just thought it was funny because I'm like, oh, like this is. I was in a very corporate. I was in a WeWork, which it's like a lot of
Mm.
people working and people like have the headphones, and I was just dancing, but I was like, oh, like this has made me uncomfortable. So I was like, it's good to be uncomfortable every once in a while.
Well, definitely. I mean, I'm sure you'll be inspiring some people in the WeWork who are just bored, and then you look over you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. I know sometimes I'll have like coaching calls with my clients and I'm talking about like really deep stuff and then there will be like 50 people around in the WeWork and I'm just like, is this kind of weird that I'm talking about like really personal stuff? But I don't know. Like it is what it is, right? Maybe some people are listening and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe he's talking about like divorce and like marriage and cheating and like infidelity and stuff in front of like 50 people. So yeah,
They're turning
it's
the
interesting.
volume down. They've got the headphones in, but they're listening.
Yeah. They're just like, "Oh wow, like what's happening?"
I think I'm quite used to that because a lot of times when I go to a restaurant with friends, just talking about what I do, and then because what I do really encourages people in my private life to tell me all their
Hmm.
secrets.
Yeah.
I have a lot of secrets on people, and the people at the next tables, I'm kind of entertaining them basically.
Yeah. So do you notice or did they ask you sometimes like afterwards they're like what like do they
Kind of like, I guess sometimes I'm in a kind of a bubble a lot of the time, but I think, wow, that conversation was pretty juicy, you know. And
Yeah.
I don't really care too much about it, but yeah, it has. I have a lot of times when there have been strange looks.
Hmm. That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like you know how like Barcelona might be the same, but in New York City, sometimes when you're at restaurants, the table is literally like an inch away from you. So there's like no
Yeah.
privacy. So it's weird, but it's like you always hear like people having conversations as if I'm not even right next door, but it's like you can clearly hear because I'm only like you know what I mean? Like if I extended my arm, I would smack their face, you know? But it's just weird how New York City, there's like that it's almost like it's expected. It's like not weird that I'm like totally listening to everything this person's saying, like I'm like on the same table as them, but I'm not. So I don't know. It's like a weird dynamic in New York City.
Oh, I guess the space is an issue, but here as well, I think people just don't really respect personal space. It's not such a big deal, but
Hmm.
people speak quite loud here in Spain. In Spain,
It, this is such a bad generalization, but a lot of Asians is like really bad. Like I don't know if you've been to Asia, but like they'll be screaming like really loudly, and it's like, dude, I'm like literally like a foot away from you. Like you don't have to like scream, but it's like I don't know why that is. It's like they just maybe in Asia they're not taught because maybe in England because you're taught like manners and like
Mm.
your space and you like respect and like it's almost like etiquette is like a course. I hate to generalize, but I think a lot of like the Asian countries, like that's not really taught, right? So it's almost like there are no boundaries. So when I grew up, because I was living in the living room with my two sisters and we were in bunk beds and in the living room with multi-family house, like, with a lot of people. So there's like no concept of boundaries. So it's kind of like when I, you know, left that and I'm like, oh wow, like this is not normal. Like this it's not like normal to feed that all over each other. So it is interesting. So I think I actually don't have a good concept of that boundaries because of just how I grew up. It's like, when you have like eight people living in like a one bedroom like apartment, like there's like no boundaries. Like everyone's just screaming all over each other. There's no space. It's not like I can just like have my privacy, it's like I'm always surrounded by people like every second. Yeah.
I guess you can't really have too many boundaries in that situation, but I think a lot of the time, lack of boundaries is about people pleasing, which might not be from the same. Because I've come from
Yeah.
that kind of world of being feeling really invisible at school and when I was growing up, and
Mm,
overcompensating, oversharing.
mm,
Like even just my birthday last week, it was a really big deal for me to actually have a party because usually I would make it as one of my norms. I'm an event organizer. I organize events and dinners every Saturday, like networking events. And in the
mm,
past, just made it the networking event, and it happens to be my birthday on that day. So a lot of people are
mm,
coming, but they're not really my friends. But this time, I made it my party, and it was a very strange feeling. But even when I was inviting people, I was saying, "Oh, and so and so's coming who you all would also know. And I stopped myself. I thought, no, they're coming for you. So I have to kind of
Aw.
and kind of like,
Aw.
embrace my
Yeah.
amazing. So because
Huh.
I've really struggled with that a lot. People might not think that, but when you are in the public eye or online, a lot of the time it's compensating some kind of lack of
Mm.
ability that you've had, as
Hmm.
when you were growing up. And you can shine. Like, everyone's saying niche down, and that's your stage to be a weirdo and just own
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
just be you and
Hmm.
embrace your
Y-
individuality.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. Like, I'll have like my birthday events will have like 30 plus people that will come, and like usually like I'll invite like 40 people and 30 will come, and I'm just like this is weird. Like people are just, but to your point, it's like, yeah, I think most of my life I was overcompensating. I would argue because I've read, I think at this point, 30 different billionaire biographies,
Oh,
and
wow.
they're the most insecure people in the world. Like you read their inner thoughts, and they're just like, oh, I failed, like I'm such a failure. Like the guy who's Bill Gates co-founder, Paul Allen, he owned uh the Seahawks, like a professional football team. He created like a cancer research center, very, very successful, 30 billion in net worth. And you read his biography and he's just like, oh, I failed in life. And you're just like, how are you a failure? But it's because like the whole book he's just complaining about how he never amounted to anything compared to Bill Gates. And you're just like, and then after 30 biographies, you're like, okay, like there's a theme here.
I think I've heard of that actually, just a constant rivalry.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Venus, thank you so much. This has been, I know we scheduled for an hour, but it always goes over because we always have such insightful conversations.
We have
Yeah, I'm
to
sure.
more about imposter syndrome, boundaries. We've got all these topics to talk
I
about.
know it's so good. I feel like we could talk like every month.
Series.
So yeah, I'll send you the clip because I have a recording of it as well. So if there's any parts that you want to put through Opus, like I'm sure
Oh,
there's
cool.
there's there's probably
Amazing.
some good stuff for your Opus stuff. That's what I would do. I would do a lot of these podcasts, and then Opus will give me like maybe 10 clips and then maybe five or six of them I'll use, and some of the other ones I'm like, yeah, like this is not as good as the six that I enjoy. And then that gave me like a lot of the short form content, like to your point, like for TikTok and all that
Yeah,
stuff. So
that's amazing. That'd be amazing for LinkedIn, especially with some of the topics we've just spoken about, you know, yeah, there's a lot of potential juice in that.
oh, did you want to share about your meditation?
My meditation, which one, the life upgrade or
Yes. Yeah.
my content. Well, when I had Bell's palsy, I was listening to Insight Timer, which is a meditation app. I listened to it all, I mean, 4 or 5 times a day. It was my
Wow.
salvation. And I realized at that time that I didn't want to be the patient. I wanted to be the healer. So it
Huh.
inspired me because a lot of people watched my YouTube channel just to fall asleep because they liked my voice. And I thought that was very strange because in an ASMR way to listen to a sex toy review to fall asleep, to get relaxed. That's a great thing about long form, but that's a bit of a sidetrack. So anyway, I got really inspired by that when I was sick, and then I got a microphone and then started to make some meditations. I'm really into affirmations, so all of my
Mm.
meditations mostly affirmations, and also I do
Oh.
affirmations at the end of my podcast. So the podcast episode with you, I've made strength and vulnerability affirmations. So I always
Aw.
do affirmations that are related to the topic, and I find it very easy just to come up with affirmations. And I whisper them. It's in both ears. It's like I'm literally in your ear, like I am strong, I am strong. So it's like an ASMR effect, and
Huh.
there are 3 affirmations that are the most powerful ones, which repeat throughout, because repetition is also very powerful for the subconscious.
Mm.
And then on Insight Timer, I share a lot of meditations on there, about generic topics like money, abundance, health, love. And then on the more sexual ones, I sell on my website. So
Oh,
things like
cool.
I'm a clitoral gratitude affirmations, or I'm an orgasmic woman affirmations, or even BDSM affirmations, polyamorous affirmations, like all these different
Oh,
topics.
cool.
Yeah. So
Huh.
I just love affirmations because it's a great way to program your
Mm.
mind. And big fan of Florence Scovel Shinn and
Oh, yeah.
Lo- what's she called? Louise Hay. So they're like
Mm.
my uses of affirmations.
Yeah,
So.
Louise Hay is amazing. And then what's Byron Katie I like a lot.
Okay, I follow her, but I don't really, not really, don't know that much of her
She
content.
has Loving What Is just like
Oh
her.
wow.
Yeah, she's good. But cool. Well, thank you so much for there were so many takeaways like you said around like not only how to have rewire our brain and have a more positive or a more empowering relationship to feedback or negative feedback more specifically, but around being a content creator, which I know a lot of my friends also reach out to me on this topic. So this will be a good resource I'll send to them. And also just about yeah, I mean there were so many takeaways. Like I feel like I probably have to like rewatch it and digest. And I think I'm gonna write a newsletter article about some of the themes in this because I think you inspired me. I'm like, oh yeah, like let's go there and go re and to your point, I think it's empowering if we can if instead of like ignoring and kind of running away from the past, I think if we can go back to it and then for the sole purpose of hey, this will actually serve a lot of people. I think that's a much better way of looking at it because I think initially I was the way I think subconsciously I was like, oh, I think this will get a lot of likes, which is probably true as well. But it's it's a different intention, like doing it for fame and getting 5 more subscribers or whatever versus like, no, like this is actually like a true expression of who I am in the world right now.
Exactly. 'Cause that will come after, once it's all aligned.
Yeah, and people can sense it too, I'm sure. Like they'll know. They're like, "Oh, this guy's like just trying to like get me to hit the like button," versus like, "Wow, like
Yeah.
this is actually very very genuine, very insightful." So,
Hmm. For sure.
uh
Well, thank you so much.
awesome.
I appreciate your time and your platform to share my message.
Yeah, yeah, look forward to many more conversations with you.
Great. And then check out the podcast as well, because we had a podcast talking about LinkedIn
Oh
as well.
yeah. I think because of your podcast, I have people sending me friend requests.
Oh,
Um,
really? Oh,
yeah,
cool.
yeah, because
Amazing.
because I'm like, oh, I don't know too many people from
A
Barcelona, so I'm
LinkedIn
like,
expert on, on LinkedIn is like, okay, we want to connect with him.
yeah. So it was mostly through LinkedIn. Yeah.
That's
So
quite
thank
cool.
you.
LinkedIn expert. So that's probably a good thing to put on the thumbnail.
Yeah. Oh, on my LinkedIn like profile.
On the thumbnail I made, it
Oh
says
yeah,
they've
yeah.
been expert. So obviously that's going to be, yeah, cool. That's great. Mhm.
Awesome.